This is Chapter 6 of Hunt, Gather, Parent by Michaeleen Doucleff. Chapter 6. Master Motivators. What's better than praise? Each day around noon, when you walk by Maria's house, you'll hear a sound coming from the kitchen. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Then there's a pause for about 20 seconds. And again. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Is she hanging up something on the wall? Building a piece of furniture? Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. It goes on for 15 minutes, maybe longer. As I walk closer to her door, the scent hits my nose. Sweet, buttery corn, caramelizing as it toasts above a coal fire. Maria sits at her kitchen table with a big mountain of pale yellow masa in front of her. She pinches off a little ball of dough, about the size of a walnut, and with her fingertips flattens the ball into a perfect disc. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Then she gently lays the disc on a hot skillet for a minute or so until it puffs up like a pufferfish, and she flips it to the other side. These tortillas taste like heaven, warm, creamy, and soft. I will never eat a better tortilla in my life. Then Maria's 5-year-old daughter, Alexa, comes over to help, and what I witness is a master class in motivating children. Alexa's little fingers are clumsy, slow, and just barely getting the job done. But Maria doesn't stop her. She doesn't swoop in and grab the child's hand and show her how to make the tortillas better. Instead, she steps back and lets Alexa make misshapen ones, however Alexa feels is best. She lets her daughter practice, and when the little girl tires of the task, Maria doesn't force her to stay and finish. Alexa hops up and goes outside, while Maria continues working. Next, Gelmi, Maria's middle daughter, comes to the table. She's 9 years old and has been playing outside with a friend. Now, she wants to help. Compared to her little sister, Gelmi is a pro at making the tortillas. But she still has a lot to learn. Making tortillas like Maria's is incredibly difficult. It takes years of practice. So most of Gelmi's tortillas end up a bit misshapen. She tries over and over again to make a perfect one. Then, voila! Gelmi does it. She makes a beauty, a perfect little disc, even in thickness and round as the moon. Guess what Maria does? Or more to the point, what she doesn't do. In the 1970s, an American psychologist named Edward Deci set his sights on an ambitious goal, to figure out what motivates a person to act voluntarily. Up to that point, psychologists had focused on a different type of motivation, one shaped and controlled by external forces, such as rewards, for example, money, punishments, for example, timeouts, and recognition. But Ed wanted to know what makes people act without the spur of such outside forces. What naturally motivates a person to seek out a new challenge or step up to help others when there's no obvious reward on the horizon? What makes a person do something when no one is watching? What fuels their inner fire? For example, when I first started writing this book, all the effort I was putting in seemed foolish. I was basically doubling my workload each week, and the travel completely drained my bank account. At the same time, I didn't know if anyone would ever care about this story, or if I would recover any of the money. All the same, in my free time, I still found myself writing and researching. Why? Because I really enjoyed it. I loved meeting the people in this book and learning from them. And I felt like I was growing as a writer and journalist through the process. I had what Ed calls intrinsic motivation. The drive to write came from inside me and not from an external reward. With intrinsic motivation, the activity is enjoyable on its own. It is internally rewarding. Intrinsic motivation makes a person dance in their living room at night when no one is watching. It makes Rosy immediately start coloring in the morning when she wakes up. And it makes Gelmi come in from playing with her friends to help Maria with the tortillas. In many ways, intrinsic motivation is magical. It allows people to grow, learn, and work without much struggle or resistance. And it likely lasts longer than its counterpart, extrinsic motivation. External influences such as rewards and punishments can actually weaken intrinsic motivation. Sticker charts, promises of ice cream, timeouts, threats of punishment or other consequences often undermine this type of motivation. In other words, if you were to give Gelmi 10 pesos, or a gold star on a chart for each tortilla she makes perfectly, over time she might stop making tortillas voluntarily. Yet with no reward, the little girl willingly comes to the table to help her mom, day after day. Why? What fuels intrinsic motivation? To date, psychologists have published at least 1,500 studies about this type of question, and it's possible to draw remarkable parallels between the findings of these studies and how parents treat children in Maya communities, such as Kajaal. Western psychology finds that 3 ingredients are needed to spark intrinsic motivation. The first one we've already talked about, connectedness. Ingredient 1, sense of connectedness. Connectedness is the feeling of being related to others, of belonging to a team or family. Studies show that when a child feels connected to a teacher, they'll want to work hard in that class. The same goes for parents. The more connected a child feels with their family, the more they will want to work with us on family goals and chores. A great way to connect with our kids is to give them their membership card. Welcome them into our world and come together as a family to accomplish common goals, like making tortillas for lunch. Working together is more enjoyable and often faster. Ingredient 2, sense of autonomy. I've mentioned autonomy before, and it's so important, so very important, that we'll devote a whole chapter to it later. But in the situation I described earlier, you can see this ingredient at work in Maria's interactions with her daughters. By not forcing Alexa or Gelmi to come help make tortillas, and by not forcing them to stay after they'd lost interest, Maria was honoring her children's autonomy. Ingredient 3, sense of competency. In order to stay motivated at a task, a child needs to have a sense that they're competent enough to do the job. Nobody wants to keep working at something when they feel constantly frustrated or like they aren't making any progress. On the other hand, an easy task may become too boring to continue. So there's a sweet spot. The task is challenging enough to keep you interested, but also easy enough that you feel competent doing it. This sweet spot is where intrinsic motivation likely occurs. Maria and other Maya parents have several tricks up their sleeves to help children feel a sense of competency while doing chores and other adult tasks. We'll talk all about those tools in just a second. But first, a word about a tool they don't use. That's praise. During my entire stay in Kajaal, I never hear a parent praise a child, and I definitely never hear lavish praise. For example, "Oh, Angela, that's amazing how you did the dishes without being asked. You are a wonderful daughter." Even though the children often behave in ways that would make me squeal with joy. Parents don't say, "Good job," or other phrases like that. Sometimes they may use facial expressions to show their approval, and these nonverbal expressions are important. They are clear signs of approval, says psychologist Rebecca Mejia-Arauz. While Maria and I are talking, I notice her using these signals with me. She lifts her eyebrows to acknowledge that I'm getting the hang of what she's telling me. Or she nods her head and says, When it comes to no praise, Maya parents aren't alone. In all my travels outside of the U.S., I've never heard parents praise their children. And I've definitely never heard a constant stream of praise like the one that comes out of my mouth on a daily basis. Heck, sometimes I even praise Rosy when she makes a mistake. "Oh, good job for trying." What's that all about? I hear so little praise on my trips around the world that I have become suspicious of it. I am starting to think that praise causes more trouble for parents than it's worth. Praise is a tricky beast. It can fizzle with a kid for many reasons, especially when the praise doesn't feel genuine, doesn't seem justified for the accomplishment, or is simply ever present. When a child's every positive action garners a "good job" or "nice," then praise can undermine their intrinsic motivation, making children less likely to do a task in the future. Praise has another pitfall, a big one. It can cause strife among siblings because praise breeds competition. Psychologists have found that when young children grow up hearing frequent praise, they learn from an early age to compete with siblings for approval and attention from their parents. The lack of praise may be one reason Maya siblings work well together and fight less than American siblings. They don't need to compete with one another for verbal kudos. So if Maya parents don't use praise as a tool, then what are they calling on? Turns out they have quite a few alternatives. The first one is so beautiful that once I really understood how to use it, my relationship with Rosy blossomed like a magnolia tree in the spring. That tool is acknowledgement. Step 3. Acknowledge a child's contribution. Instead of praising children, MY-cah parents acknowledge or accept the child's idea or contribution to an activity, no matter how inconsequential, ridiculous, or misshapen that contribution or tortilla might be. MY-cah parents let the child make a meaningful contribution to the daily tasks, and they don't tend to fuss with that contribution in order to meet the expectations you would have as an adult. Parents value a child's version of sweeping, the child's misshapen tortilla, or the ideas a child brings forward. They value a child's vision, and they respect that vision. Acknowledgement from parents fuels the child's interest in a task, says psychologist Lucia Alcala. I think that it gives the child motivation to help more. A child sees that their contribution matters, and they're helping the family. That's more powerful than any praise. For example, when Alexa makes a misshapen tortilla, Maria may fix it slightly before putting it on the skillet. But she doesn't try to force Alexa to make a better one. She doesn't lecture Alexa about how to do it, and she doesn't grab the little girl's hand to help her. Instead, Maria acknowledges and values Alexa's contribution to lunch by accepting the tortillas as she made them. Maria has confidence that eventually, Alexa will master tortilla making through practice and watching. Why rush the process? Rushing would only cause conflict and stress. Until Alexa has more experience, Maria quietly bolsters her sense of competency, which in turn likely boosts the girl's motivation to practice making tortillas again tomorrow. The reverse is also true. If a parent resists a child's idea or contribution, it can erode a child's sense of competency and demotivate them. Parental resistance can come in many flavors, such as ignoring an idea, rejecting it outright by saying something like, no, we can't do that, or no, we don't do it like that, we do it like this, or giving a lesson on the proper way a task is done. Parents can also resist by not using the child's work, completely redoing it, or grabbing a tool from a child and doing the work oneself. MY-cah and other Indigenous parents tend not to resist like this. They don't get in a child's way while the child is helping. The moms don't stop the child from doing something, even if it's wrong, Rebecca says, referring to the Nahua heritage moms. Instead, and this is key, the parent pays attention to what the child is doing and then builds off the child's idea. As a result, the parent sets up a beautiful cycle of collaboration wherein the child or parent contributes an idea and the other takes the idea and expands it. Lucia calls this fluid collaboration. It's when two people are working seamlessly together, like a single organism with 4 arms. In those moments, there's minimal talking, minimal resistance, and minimal conflict. In a way, the MY-cah parents treat the child as a co-partner in the activity. Parents believe that knowledge isn't one-directional, flowing only from the parent to the child. Rather, they recognize knowledge is bi-directional. Information and ideas can come from the children, too. After our conversation, Rebecca's words echo in my head for days, even weeks afterward. They don't stop the child from doing something, even if it's wrong. I repeat that phrase to myself over and over again while trying to collaborate with Rosy. Quickly, I realize that I have been doing just the opposite. I interfere with her contributions. Not just once in a while, but all of the time. I resist her ideas, and I even flat out ignore them. And I definitely haven't believed that I could learn from Rosy, especially in the kitchen. I think knowledge flows only from me to her, and not the reverse. There are so many examples of this, it's hard to choose. But one instance sticks out in my mind, perhaps because it happened just before I started writing this chapter. To be honest, I'm embarrassed to tell you about it. It makes me look silly and childish, but I'll share it anyway, as it's a vivid example of what a big difference my acknowledgement and my valuing Rosy's ideas could make in our relationship. One Sunday afternoon, Rosy's coloring in the living room and I'm making kebabs for a dinner party. It's a perfect task for a 3-year-old. All you do is push chunks of chicken and vegetables, zucchini, mushrooms, and peppers onto skewers. So I invite Rosy over to help. Come, my love, come help me make the kebabs for dinner. She runs over and takes her place on a step stool next to me. I continue to make the kebabs. Immediately, she veers off course. She insists on making an all-chicken skewer. My knee-jerk reaction is to stop her, to change her trajectory, to force her creations to conform to the expectations I have for the kebabs. But that's not what we're making, I say. We'll run out of chicken and we won't have enough for the other kebabs. A big argument erupts. In the end, Rosy starts crying and runs away, quite upset, and returns to coloring in the living room. Well, that was a miserable failure, I think, and I finish the kebabs myself. I decide to move on and forget about the argument. It's not the first time that my attempt at collaborating with her has ended in tears. At least this time, I'm not crying as well. A few weeks later, when I sit down to write this chapter, I re-listen to my interviews with Maria, Teresa, Rebecca, and Lucia, and I begin to see the error of my ways. I thought Rosy was having a hard time collaborating with me, but in reality, the problem is me. I'm not collaborating with her. I resist her ideas and don't value them. Many times I don't listen to what she's trying to tell me. So I decide to give myself another shot at collaborating with Rosy. I go back to the store, buy more kebab ingredients, and set up the exact same scenario. Sunday afternoon, me making kebabs, Rosy coloring in the living room. Again, I call her over. Rosy, my love, come and help with the kebabs. This time, however, she doesn't get up. In fact, she doesn't even look up from coloring. Not very motivated, I think. So I acknowledge my mistake from last time. You can make whatever design you think is best, even an all-chicken one. She rushes over. I can? Yes. She hops on her step stool and gets right to work. She makes a giant chicken and pepper kebab with about 8 chunks of chicken all smashed together. I don't stop her, but instead acknowledge her contribution, not with words, but through my actions. I take her finished kebab and place it on the plate next to the others. And the acknowledgement works. Rosy smiles at me and begins working on another kebab. Oh no, I think we're going to run out of chicken. But that doesn't happen. To my utmost surprise, she changes course, and she starts collaborating. She pays attention to what I'm doing and joins me. She makes kebabs that look more like mine, using zucchini and mushrooms too. We begin to work in a way that's fluid and organic, like the one organism with many limbs. I help her push some mushrooms onto her skewer, and she passes me a piece of chicken when I clearly need one. Working together is smooth, easy, and fun, until she gets tired, runs off, and starts coloring again. But this time no one is crying. In fact, we both feel really good. I feel a tiny grin on my face. Valuing her input and acknowledging her ideas had really made a difference, shifting how the entire experience felt. And guess what? That chicken and pepper kebab, the one she made, tasted really good. Next time we'll make a bunch of those, as well as the mixed veggies. Try it 3. Learn to motivate children. As a parent, there are many ways to acknowledge a child's ideas without actually doing what they ask. Sometimes a simple comment like, "That's a good idea," is all a child needs to feel included and motivated to stay involved, even if you don't use their idea at all. A Maya parent could say, "Uts shan," which literally translates to "also good." An adult would interpret this statement to mean, "I don't agree," but to a child, it seems like acceptance. As I've mentioned, the interpreter Rodolfo Puig used this strategy with me while setting up interviews in Kajaal. I would come up with crazy ideas. Can Rosy and I move in with Teresa for the rest of the summer? And Rodolfo never outright rejected them. He never rolled his eyes or informed me, "No way, you crazy gringa lady. We cannot do those intrusive things," which he had every right to do. Instead, he would acknowledge the idea. He would nod his head and say, "Yes, we can." Then he would let the idea go for a while until I brought it back up again. By that point, he had usually figured out how to satisfy my request in a feasible and respectful way. Nahua heritage parents sometimes acknowledge children's work with small, casual gifts. Otherwise, they don't generally give rewards for specific tasks, Lucia and her colleagues find. But the gifts aren't tied to a particular task, such as, "If you help me do the dishes, I'll buy you ice cream." Instead, the parent rewards the child for their general helpfulness, as being a contributing member of the family, as Lucia and her colleagues write. And these treats are typically small, such as cooking a special meal or buying the child something necessary, like underpants. In many cultures, parents acknowledge contributions by connecting them to maturity, growing up, and starting to learn. For example, one mom told Lucia and her colleagues how she acknowledges her son's help around the house. When he does something good and what he needs to do, I just tell him, "Oh, my son, you've already learned to work," and he gets very happy. Other moms say they congratulate a child on growing up, as the child contributes more to the work around the house. One mom says she gives the child a hug and acknowledges their mature family role. I tried this last night with Rosy after she voluntarily started sweeping the living room, and she loved it. Recognizing a child's overall helpfulness provides more information to a child than praising a specific task. Instead of focusing on a one-off accomplishment, you're helping the child to learn an overarching value. Anthropologist Jean Briggs has documented a similar type of acknowledgement used by some Inuit parents. In one case, she describes how parents acknowledge a 5-year-old girl who is learning to be generous by sharing her candy with a sibling. A 5-year-old is already savvy, and she knows she's supposed to give most of it, the candy, if not all of it, to her 3-year-old sister. So she does, and the adults say, "Look at that, she gave it. How generous she is." Many parents around the world take this idea one step further by associating cooperative behavior with being a big girl or big boy. Up in the Arctic, one Inuit mom connects hitting a younger sibling with being a baby, whereas being kind and generous to the sibling is associated with not being a baby. This tool is so powerful in our home that we'll discuss it again in the next section. Here's how to start trying these approaches at home with kids of all ages, from toddlers to teens. Dip your toe. Point out helpfulness and unhelpfulness. Instead of praising children for helping with a request, switch to acknowledging overall helpfulness. Don't overdo it or do it too frequently. A simple statement like, "That's helpful," is all you need when a child shows Acomedido or voluntarily helps. You might even wait until the end of the week to acknowledge the child's overall effort. Focus on the learning aspect or the contribution to the family. "You are really starting to learn to be helpful," or "You are starting to be a big girl and contribute to the family's work." To help your child better understand what helpfulness means, point it out in others. This also helps communicate to your child that you value this trait and that it's important to you. When you acknowledge helping, focus on how working together makes everyone's life easier. For example, one morning on the way to school with Rosy, I said, "Dada was really acomedido this morning. He was paying attention and pitching in when needed." "Yeah, and so am I," she responded without missing a beat. Acknowledge unhelpful behavior as well. Don't be afraid to point out when the child isn't being helpful. Parents often say sarcastically, "Don't be too acomedido," or "Don't help too much," Lucia says. That signals to the child to help. You can also acknowledge when someone else fails to show acomedido. This will help the child learn what not to do, and focus on why the behavior isn't valued. Again, use simple statements so it's clear. For example, one afternoon, a friend of Rosy's didn't help us pick up toys in our living room. So I said, "That wasn't very acomedido. If she had helped us, we could have all finished faster." Stop punishments and rewards for specific chores. These tools simply don't work when it comes to teaching children to do chores, or really anything, voluntarily. In many cases, they actively undermine children's own drive to help. In place of punishments and rewards, try these motivational tools. Explain the value the task holds for the entire family. Try explaining to the child why helping out is so important or essential in the home. One Nahua heritage mom told Lucia that she never punishes her daughter, "But I do get upset and admonish her." When her daughter doesn't clean up her toys, she tells the girl, "You need to try harder." The mother explained to Lucia, "I tell her that so she sees that we're also trying hard with the little we can give her, so she should try hard too." This approach works well with Rosy, especially when she can see that I'm tired and overworked. I tell her, "Rosy, your father and I are working hard to make this house nice for everyone. We are trying our best. As a family member, you need to work hard and try your best." Connect the helpfulness to maturity. If a child takes initiative and does a chore voluntarily, Acknowledge their growth and progress by saying something like, "Oh, you're starting to learn how to contribute," or "You cleaned up your toys because you're a big girl." I also tell Rosy when she acts like a baby. For example, if she doesn't clean up her toys or help with the dishes, I say, "Oh, you didn't do it because you're a baby?" And that comment often leads to a whole discussion about what big girls do versus what babies can do. For example, do babies get to ride a bike? Do babies get to eat ice cream? Eventually, Rosy wants to be a big girl and goes and cleans up. Let the child have fun with the chore. I'm not a big fan of making chores fun or turning them into a game. I cannot sustain that energy for very long, and I don't enjoy acting like a 3-year-old. But if Rosy comes up with her own way to make the chore more playful, I don't stop her. Instead, I pay attention to her idea or contribution and try to build upon it. For example, one afternoon while hanging the clothes on the line to dry, she starts throwing the clothes all over the porch. So I decided to incorporate her play into the chore. I tell her, "Stand by the clothesline and I will throw you the clothes to hang up." She loves it. She wants to keep throwing the clothes back and forth. Eventually, we get the job done. It takes a little longer, but her motivation for doing laundry skyrocketed. Now she runs over when I call, sometimes, and we have incorporated the throwing idea into several other chores, such as cleaning up Legos and putting away books. I tell her, "Rosy, stand over by the bookshelf and I'll throw you the books." That totally gets her helping. Threaten natural consequences. If you need to use a threat, try to make the punishment as close to a natural consequence as possible. For example, I sometimes tell Rosy, "If we don't clean up the kitchen, ants will come and take over the counters. Do you want ants in our food?" Or I say, "If we don't wash your lunchbox, you will have to eat from a dirty, stinky box tomorrow. Do you want that?" Point out when you help them. With Rosy, I find that pointing out reciprocal responsibility works well to boost her motivation. For example, one night she doesn't help with the dishes. When I ask her to come help, she says, "I'm tired," and runs away. 10 minutes later, she comes back and asks me to help her find her lovey. Then I say something like, "Wait, did you help me with the dishes just a few minutes ago?" Jump in. Learn to value a child's contribution. When a child comes over to help with a task, listen to their idea. Acknowledge it in some way, either by trying it, incorporating it into your activity, nodding your head, or saying, "We can." If the child takes action, don't stop them. Instead, pay attention and see how they're trying to contribute. Then think of a way to build off that contribution or a way to improve their work slightly. Whatever you do, suppress the urge to resist. Refrain from interfering with the child or changing their course. If you step back and let a child take over a task, the child will be way more motivated to help out again in the future than if you reject, minimize, or ignore their ideas and contributions. Measure how much you praise your children and how much you resist them. Your smartphone is a great device for analyzing your parenting habits and gaining a fresh perspective. One evening, put your phone on the kitchen counter or dining room table and set it to record in the background for 30 to 60 minutes while you interact with your children. Then, later that evening, listen carefully to the recording. How many times do you praise the child for an inconsequential task or something they should just be doing without the need for praise? How many times do you resist their ideas or just ignore them when they're trying to contribute? How many times do you interfere with their actions and try to change their course? I accidentally ran this experiment one night when I left my radio mic running on the kitchen counter for 2 hours while Rosy and I made dinner. Listening to the tape afterward was really difficult. It actually made me cry. As I played back our conversation, I realized that not only was I resisting Rosy's ideas and contributions, but I wasn't listening to her words at all. Many times she was trying to tell me X, while I was so certain Y was correct that I could not hear her. I really thought that I knew the answer and didn't need to listen to her. She kept trying so hard to get her ideas across that she would start crying. And the pleading and pain in her voice was so sad that it broke my heart. I realized I needed to stop talking so much, including praising her, and make a real effort to pay attention to her words and actions. Psychological anthropologist Suzanne Gaskins had given me similar advice a few months earlier. American parents need to stop talking so much and listen more to their children, she said. Have praise-free days. Once you realize how much you praise your child, try pruning it back. Start small. Set a timer for 15 minutes and try not to verbally praise the child until the timer goes off. Work your way up to 2 hours and eventually entire days. Assess how you feel after these praise-free moments. Is parenting less stressful, less tiring? How does your child act? Do they seek your attention less? Are they less demanding? Is your time together a little bit more relaxing? Does your child fight less with their siblings? We now have the 3 ingredients or steps needed to support children's helpfulness. As we'll see in the next 2 sections, parents can use these 3 steps to transmit any value they want to a child. Across the globe, cultures use this formula to transmit all kinds of values, such as generosity, respect, and patience. The steps are practice, model, acknowledge. 1. Practice. Give kids oodles of practice helping out around the house and working together, especially the young ones. Assign tasks, invite them over to watch, and encourage their desire to participate. 2. Model. Give children their membership cards. Immerse them in your day-to-day life so they can gradually learn chores by watching and can feel like full-fledged members of the family. 3. Acknowledge. When a child tries to help, accept their contributions and value their ideas. Respect their vision. Tell the child when they are learning the value. Point out the presence of the value, or its absence, in others' actions. Connect their learning to growing up or maturing. Summary for Chapter 6. How to motivate children. Ideas to remember. To motivate a child without bribes or threats, the child needs to feel connected to you or another person close to the child, like they are making the choice to do the task and no one is forcing them, like they are competent and that their contribution will be valued. Praise can undermine motivation and generate competition and strife between siblings. Parents can learn quite a lot from a child. Knowledge can flow in both directions. Don't assume your approach or vision is the best. When you pay attention to a child's vision or ideas, you'll likely find the child often has valuable and useful information. Accepting a child's knowledge, idea, or contribution is a potent way to motivate the child. Do it today. For children of all ages, resist the urge to correct a child, especially when they're pitching in or helping the family. Step back and let a child perform a task without interfering, even if the child isn't executing the task as you wish or taking the optimal approach. If a child is resisting a request, for example, to help with the dishes, you're likely forcing the issue too hard. The child knows what you want. Stop asking. Wait and let the child take the lead. Pay close attention to how a child is trying to contribute, and then build off their ideas instead of resisting them. Help a child learn a task by letting them practice that task instead of lecturing or explaining the task to them. Offer simple course corrections sparingly while the child takes action. Accept a child's contribution to an activity even if it isn't what you expect or want. Use praise very sparingly. When you do praise, attach it to learning an overall value. For example, you are starting to learn to be helpful. Or to maturity. For example, you are really becoming a big girl.